Good afternoon. Welcome to Winning with Data Measurement with Beth Adams. I'm Sharice Pidcock with Results Washington. My pronouns are she, her, and I will be your moderator today. We have about 770 attendees registered for this session, and we're so happy that you're here. I'm joined today by Melissa Shaw, who is providing the ASL interpretation for this session. And a thank you to my team member, John Cooper, who is managing technology behind the scenes. We have a few housekeeping things to cover before we get started. So we know many of you are familiar with Zoom meetings, but there are some differences in Zoom webinar that we're using today. The biggest difference is that you won't be able to talk or have your video visible. This ensures that all participants can focus on today's presentation. We want to draw your attention to a few different features in Zoom and how we'll use them. Move your mouse and the toolbar will appear and you can see the icons for the chat and the Q&A. We are using it today to share the handout, and there may be some chat, but that's not available for this session. We do have, however, the Q&A feature available. So if you have questions, please pop those into that feature and we'll respond to as many of those as we're able to in our time today. And especially if you're having tech issues, go ahead and drop those in and we'll do our best to help you with any challenges you might be experiencing. Next, you'll notice the icon for the closed captioning. If you wish to see closed captioning, click that icon and to turn it on and off. And you can adjust your view to make the presentation or the speaker larger by clicking and sliding that vertical bar on your screen from left to right. We are excited to be able to provide you with session materials today. They will be on our website. They are on our website now, and the video will be on our website within about a week from today's session. So you can check that out later if you want to rewatch the session or forward it to someone. If the presenter gets disconnected, we will try to get the webinar back up in about 5 minutes. And in the event that we're unable to do so, we will re-record the session and put it on our website so you can watch it at your leisure. And then finally, at the end of the session, we have a survey that we ask you to complete. Please take the time to complete this survey. It's just a few quick questions, and it will really help the presenter and Results Washington have some real-time feedback on how your experience was. So with that, I would like to welcome Beth. We're fortunate to have her with us today. Beth is the Outcome Improvement Specialist for the Aging and Long-Term Services Administration within the Department of Social and Health Services. Welcome, Beth.
Thank you. All right, let's get my screen shared here. All right, well, thank you, everyone, and thank you for joining me today. As Sheree said, my name is Beth Adams, and I am here this afternoon to share with you the WIN team's experience with data measurement. I'm a social gerontologist with over 25 years of experience in working with older adults in nonprofit, healthcare, and government sectors. My formal introduction to lean started at the University of Michigan Health System. Informally, though, and unbeknownst to me at the time, it first started when I was 10 or 11 and broke a NASA robot by demonstrating that the programmers and engineers hadn't done the necessary poka-yoke-ing or error proofing. And if there's time at the end, I will tell the full story. So I am a Lean Six Sigma Green Belt practitioner, currently working on my Black Belt. I'm one of those individuals who love data. I can spend an entire day playing with pivot tables, putting together charts and graphs for visual storytelling. And the only thing that frustrates me is if Excel crashes. I'm also skilled at process and value stream mapping. Today, I'll be briefly describing two overarching data categories, talking about measurement within the context of SMART goals, and then spend most of our time today sharing with you the WIN team's experience getting started and tracking our own efforts. Please feel free to ask your questions at any time, but I will answer them at the end. So let's get started with a poll. Select the one that best applies to you. And if we could get that launched. Great. So when it comes to this topic, I know nothing, next to nothing. I hate math and numbers. A little bit, but I'm not comfortable. Some, but I get overwhelmed if I need to do anything. A fair amount, but I want to be able to do more. I know a lot, but I'm always curious what others have to say. Or are you here to learn about using SharePoint to set up your own tracking system? So we'll give that about a minute. And then after a minute, or when the responses slow down, whichever comes first, we will get the results. And how are those results looking? How are the responses coming in? All right, so it looks like we have, the majority, a fair amount, but they want to be able to do more. And then a mix of a little bit of everything else. And for those that hate math and numbers, that's okay. My boss hates math and numbers. That's why she has me. And for those that are interested in learning about SharePoint, I'll be spending the latter half of my presentation talking about our use of that platform. So thank you. That really gives me an idea of where this group is at. So data can be categorized into multiple ways. At the highest level, it is first broken down into one of two categories, either qualitative or quantitative. Qualitative or categorical data describes the quality and characteristics of something. It is non-statistical. Examples of sources include open-ended responses on surveys, focus groups, interviews, and observations. Quantitative data. This is data that can be counted, measured, or expressed in numbers. There's a quantity to it. This is for some the dreaded math and statistics. But results are easy to summarize, compare, and track changes over time. Example of sources include surveys, including employee satisfaction surveys or customer satisfaction surveys, polls, or assessment data. And when talking about data today, we'll be talking about quantitative data. Now, within quantitative data, there are further categories, but that will take us down that dreaded, for some, statistics and math rabbit hole, and that's not the focus of today's presentation. So, qualitative data. This is useful when you need to understand the why behind something. For example, ALTSA's training unit and workforce development might want to do a focus group to understand what motivates people to work in the long-term care field in order to create a targeted marketing plan to recruit new members. Now, after doing the focus group, they'll have some ideas of categories that attendees shared. And so if one creates a set of possible responses using multiple selection rather than open-ended, and then you can ask the same question the same way over time, you're then able to use the counts associated as quantitative data, and it becomes easily measurable. Quantitative data focuses on the what is being measured and how many. For example, how many service units were provided last year by private duty nurses? And also, what is the trend line for the last 5 years? So before we proceed, I want to take a few minutes to review some additional terminology. So data, this is at the core of our measurement activities. Without it, we can't measure anything. So why is data important? Well, it's needed for identifying opportunities for improvement in quantifiable terms, and it's critical to measuring progress. And data is essential in a lean environment. So moving from data is metric. Now, metric is a measurement of data. It's a standard for measuring or evaluating something in numeric terms. It can be made from one type or several types of data in any given data set. Metrics are the first step to making sense of the raw data and applying it in a real situation. So data cannot be picked, but metrics can be. For example, in a strategic plan, you can select your target, but you can't select what is actually happening. So moving from metrics are KPIs, or key performance indicators. KPIs are a way of measuring the effectiveness of an organization and its progress towards achieving its goals. They are quantifiable measures used to gauge performance over time. And then finally, dashboards. Dashboards are a visual of multiple KPIs on one screen, one page, one slide. It's a living, breathing document. Dashboards do the visualization part. They are automated, or at least they're most effective when they're automated and updated in real time. And they're generally tied to specific operational goals. Dashboards provide leadership and other decision makers information needed to act and make decisions. So using a real world example, this is pulled from ALTSA's strategic plan. This is our data. The metric is the target, and the KPI is to the timely determination of functional reassessments. So in the handout there in the resources section, I've provided several resources, a mix of short articles and YouTube videos on goals, KPIs, and quality measures. So data is critical to goal creation and measuring progress. If you need to focus on changing something over a given period of time, framing it as a SMART goal is helpful. SMART is an acronym for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. The questions to ask and things to consider for each of these include, for specific, this addresses the who, what, where, when, and why. Measurable, what do you want to accomplish? What is the change you want to see? Attainable, can we do this within our time frame? Do we have the tools and resources? What are our competing priorities? Realistic, balancing too low a target versus a stretch target while avoiding a trap of 0 or 100 for the lean tenant, no problem is a problem. And does management support this goal? And then time bound. Goals need to have a timeline. A sentence structure that I like to use when first creating a SMART goal is who will what, from your baseline to a target by a given date. A SMART goal is one that can be measured. But what do we mean by measurable? What questions should we be asking? My colleague Montana Silvoni and I put together about a 45-minute video on creating continuous quality improvement plan for assisted living facilities with a specialized dementia care contract. And there's about a 15-minute section that I did on SMART goals. And the link to this is in the resources handout. A significant portion of that 15 minutes is spent talking about measurement. But I'm going to give you the 90-second to 2-minute version here. So what? What is it that you want to change? What is it that you need to measure? Is it how many units are delivered? What is the cost per unit? How many clients or customers were served by your program? And what does a demographic make up? Whatever it is, it needs to be concrete. It needs to be specific. And it also needs to be something that you can count. So in thinking about the what, you also need to think about the where and how. It needs to be attached to data you can collect. Where is this data stored? What is the source? What are you tracking right now? Or what could you easily start tracking? Is it automated or manual? Both the data input and the data output, taking the data from the database or storage system. And what is the time commitment to track and measure? And then, is this a new task for someone? Do they have the right training? An example of all of this, the other month, a unit manager here at Home and Community Services reached out to me and asked if I had time to help them with an urgent data request by the division director that was due by the end of the day. I did and asked them about their problem. They needed to identify unique clients and couldn't figure that out with the data that they had. So I asked them where they were getting their data from. They said they had the spreadsheet. They did a screen share so I could see the spreadsheet. And it wasn't a data source I was familiar with. It didn't look like any of the automated reports that ALTSA had. So I then asked where that data came from. And they said, staff provide it. Well, then I asked, well, where does staff get their data? It turns out all the data on this spreadsheet came from multiple automated reports. They had, in essence, created their own dashboard. The unit manager said they'd completely forgotten about this root source. I hadn't even thought of it until I asked. I then walked them through creating a pivot table once they downloaded the data, helped them get the data they needed, and sent them on their merry way. And then finally, when? What is the frequency you will choose? How often will you measure and pull data? Weekly, monthly, quarterly? And how often are data sources regularly updated? You don't want to measure or track something weekly if new data is only available monthly. And then, are you looking at a snapshot versus a change over time? For example, a year over year or a quarter to quarter comparison. These are just some of the questions to ask and factors to consider when identifying and completing the measurable portion of a SMART goal. So I know I went over that pretty quickly. So let's do another poll and check in. This time, select all that apply. So if we could get that launched. So again, check all that apply. At this point in the presentation, I learned something new about qualitative versus quantitative data. I still hate math and numbers. Thanks for clarifying the difference between metrics, KPIs, and dashboards. So that's what a SMART goal is. I'm feeling a bit more confident with this measurement stuff. I'm still waiting to learn something new. Or my head is spinning, that was way too much, way too fast. So again, we'll give it another minute and see when the responses slow down, we will share the results. All right, so, okay, great. Some people are, yet still hate math and numbers, and some people are learning new things about metrics, KPIs, qualitative versus quantitative data, and feeling a bit more confident, that's great. For those whose head is spinning, that was way too much, way too fast, I agree. What I just shared could easily be shared over a 2-hour time frame, and hopefully the tools and resources I provided will be able to assist you with that. And for those who are still waiting to learn something new, hopefully this next section where I concentrate on sharing the win journey will be of new to you. Let's close that out. All right. So I want to spend the rest of our time talking about the WIN journey. And just a reminder, I'll be taking your questions at the end. The word dearth is defined as a scarcity or lacking in something. And depending on the type of work you do, data may not be regularly or easily be available, and it might not even exist. You have to create it from the ground up. And that was the case for our team. We had a dearth of data. So a little bit of history. During the couple of years before we formalized our process, there was an Excel spreadsheet, but it wasn't consistently used. And there was no consistent way to measure what staff were doing. Projects were very much ad hoc. There was high staff turnover, and staff were spread across 2 programs within a very small unit. Our office chief needed a better way to show leadership what we were doing to justify the positions that were just filled. So we needed to formalize the process. Our parameters, we needed something that was free, that could be used by multiple people all at the same time, and then where staff could create and pull reports for leadership. And so SharePoint was selected because it was free, but there was no formal training for staff and no funds for training. We also have minimal IT support, mainly for when we have problems that we can't resolve on our own. I do want to emphasize that this type of work is hard, but it is possible. Some of the difficulties that we had are very typical of projects like this from the ground up creation. But the one thing we did have going for us was continuity of leadership or sponsorship. We had an unchanging vision. This process, we had a lot of iteration. I sort of liken it to today's medieval manor houses. They were built over time. Different eras had different influential styles. Some of the specific challenges our team had included, we were a new diverse team. 3 of us started in the summer of 2018, all within 2 months of each other. And 2 existing staff had been there about a year to 18 months prior. We also had varied backgrounds. 2 had no previous social service experience. And between late summer of 2018 and spring of 2019, there were 3 different leads due to staff being transitioned to other work and job changes. I was the 3rd lead on this. Now, the lead was responsible for creating the tracking system in SharePoint, gathering stakeholder input, and communicating with leadership. And the lead had no functional supervisory role over the others. We also had role confusion. Not all the staff involved had the title of outcome improvement specialist, but were given projects by leaders and others. And also, the initial lead didn't have the title, and they wouldn't be doing the work. But they had all the right qualifications on paper. They were a Lean Six Sigma Black Belt, a PMBOK certified project manager, and because of that, they were selected. We also had a lot of ideological differences. It's really difficult when there are different and competing ideologies about what to track. We also spent a fair amount of energy debating what a project was. Is it a capital P project, formal, going through the full process and system, and what would be in the system? Because we each heard something different when the office chief said that they wanted a system to track projects. And it created this sense of superiority that those who were doing real projects with a capital P had more value than non-projects or projects with a lowercase p, even when those non-projects were coming from executive leadership. And then the unknown. It's really hard to establish a system, let alone a database, when you don't know what your work is going to be or where it's going to come from. And we had different ideas and approaches as to how to go about creating something from the ground up. And we also had different experiences birthing projects, and that influenced our worldview and perspective on this. In the end, we were able to come together, focus on our end goal, and a SharePoint list was created. Although we had multiple iterations, it probably took about a year before we got to one that was consistently used and met the needs of both staff and our office chief. So full disclosure, I am still a novice when it comes to understanding all the intricacies of SharePoint. There's a lot I don't know or understand. I also have to admit it's not my favorite. 99% of what I know is self-taught, thanks to Google and YouTube. But it's what we have available to us, and it's widely used across Washington state government and in other industries. So that said, I do know a fair amount about the basics of lists. So a list, in simple terms, it's a form, and it's made up of fields called columns. And you can select the type of column that you need depending on what that field request need is. You can require that a field needs to be completed before saving and exiting the form. You can specify a minimum or maximum number of characters. And for the choice option, you have a drop-down or radio button for single select and a checkbox for multiple selection. One of the options you have when setting up your list is versioning, so that every time a new list is created, edited, or an existing list is added to, a new version is created and the old one is saved. Basically, it allows your IT staff to go in and restore anything that was accidentally deleted, got lost, somehow messed up. It will be a time saver, and I highly recommend it. I can't emphasize that enough. So once you have data in your list, you can create different views depending on your needs. To assist with navigation, on our homepage, we had tiles for each list view, as seen here. Now, at one point, we had two different systems depending on the type of project, but that got to be a hassle, and we eventually merged it into one. So actions with these tiles include starting a new ticket and seeing those that are active, put in the parking lot, status as pending, and completed. You can create your own categories. This is what we used for quickly navigating to the status of a project or request. For our active projects, we have our list sorted by project lead. Now, within this view, we have when the request was submitted, our estimated hours per week, and we can go in and update and change this as needed. Area impacting, is it a statewide project? Is it mainly just at headquarters or a specific region? The unit that we're assisting, the name of the person we're helping or the problem owner, the request type, and our office chief decision. We also have whether or not a partner or buddy is working with us on our project. We have found that for some of our larger projects, having a second person focus on a specific aspect of the request is really helpful, especially when that one thing, such as creating a process map or facilitating a high-stakes conversation, fits well with the strengths and interests of other team members. This is set up in the modify view. You can group by any field in your list. Here, you can see that we have it by assigned SIM, and you do not have to choose a second option, but you can. Now, other views that we played around with, but ended up not having value at the time for our team was the Gantt chart. So on our list, we had a section for our office chief to make a decision to either approve, pending, meaning we just need more information, parking lot approved, but we don't have the capacity to deal with at the moment, or turn down, along with the decision date, assigned staff, and any comments that the office chief had. This was an area that initially frequently went without completion. Thankfully, it didn't impact our ability to work on projects, but it did lead to a lot of blank fields when I'd run a report. So I added a page just for the office chief. We initially had other views here, but to simplify things, we ended up with just one view. All they need to do is come here and click on the action needed tile, and it would list any request that had a blank for the office chief decision. This also gets set up when you're modifying your view and you're filtering for criteria based on the office chief decision. Here, it's choose one, meaning there was no action. There are a lot of report building features within SharePoint, including graphs, but that is beyond the time I had to learn it and to figure out how to build it within our system. So the easiest, at least in terms of learning curve for me and our team, was to export the list to Excel, and then from there, do one of the things I do well, almost in my sleep, pivot tables. SharePoint makes it really easy to export data. One first creates the list with all the criteria they want to export. And here I have it named for report. And then when in this view, click on Export to Excel. You open up the file that was downloaded, and it will open in a table format. I would then save the file, and then I'd ensure that each request had the required fields filled out, searching for choose ones and blank and missing data where there should have been based on the request status. I'd also clean up all the true falses and convert them to yes, nos. And I do this by selecting the desired columns and then doing a find and replace. Once the list is cleaned up, I create pivot tables. And if you've never created a pivot table, it's a fairly easy thing to do. On the Insert tab, select Pivot Table or Recommended. When first starting out, I suggest using the recommended to help get you started. Once you're more comfortable, you can create your own from scratch. There also might be times where recommended pivot tables is not available because you have missing cells, fields with missing cells. So when you do start from scratch, you add your desired criteria to each table. Then to insert a chart, select a cell within your desired pivot table, and then on the Insert tab, select your desired chart. Now, there are some charts that don't work with pivot tables, including the tree map, as seen below. So I would copy the elements, just the elements needed for the chart, paste it into empty cells, and then create the tree map. So these are the only types of charts you can create with pivot tables. So if you need or want other chart types, you'll need to copy paste the relevant data, but not the entire table, into empty cells. And in the handout, I've provided a list of the Excel chart types by their pivot table availability. Now, a note about pivot tables and chart creation. If you are copying, pasting data from a pivot table to create a chart type other than those listed, know that if you make changes to the data source, your chart will not update when you go to refresh your pivot table. So I recommend using static data or data that won't be changing, data that's been finalized. Then I created a short 2-page high-level report, And included on this report example are 3 quotes, one for each staff from those whom we helped the previous year. It really adds that qualitative or that element to a report and really helps better tell a full story. We really embrace the spirit of CQI. During our bi-monthly meetings, we have one that's just for staff and then another with our office chief and administrative assistant. I'll frequently ask what isn't working with the site, with the system process, and identify areas where we can make small incremental changes along the way. But we were needing to do a bigger change than just the small incremental. So in early spring of this year, we did a mini PDCA exercise. I met with the staff individually and asked what works, and more importantly, what doesn't work? Where are the pain points? What fields are you not completing? And processes are you not completing? And why? We then came together as a group to talk about the common themes and what we wanted in our ideal state. So last time, our efforts were a bit jumbled, giving us that medieval country manor look. This time, we wanted our efforts to resemble more of a beautiful mosaic. But this time, we had the benefit of being an established team. We had 18 months together, and even though we were short-staffed, we had some degree of continuity. We also had role clarity. Roles were established and respected, and more importantly, they were aligned with the strengths and interests of team members. What also really helped is that we were ideologically aligned. As a group, we had a shared understanding, the same interpretation of what was being said and asked of us by leadership and our office chief. And then we were making data-informed decisions. We had almost 2 years of data to help drive our decision-making. The results? Well, we made some changes to our SharePoint site. For the sake of data integrity, we decided to start fresh with a new list on July 1st, the new fiscal year. So I set this table up, and as a group, we looked at the existing list, determined what was missing, and then added how we wanted to go about gathering that information. What would be the data field type? And also indicated whether or not a data field would be used for reporting and sorting and filtering. If it was noted both, it doesn't necessarily mean that that data field is not worthy, but we did discuss the need for it. For example, we'll never do a report or filter sort by what's in scope or out of scope because there's just too much variation. But they are critical elements needed when creating a charter. And since this is the one place where we store our information about our project and the needs of our customers, we keep it. I also changed how the list looks. Because of how long the list is, I wanted to make it easier to navigate through each section. So I went into SharePoint Designer and modified the HTML code. But I'd have loved to create tabs. That was my ideal state with this. And although there are plugins available, they're not available for us within DSHS to use. So I just made do with some HTML code and tables to make it easier to navigate. So next steps with our process, I want to continue to create customized views for editing our form and viewing the form. So it makes it easier on the eyes rather than just one long list that's not broken up by section or when it gets completed. I also want to work with our data folks to automate reporting via Power BI to save me time so that I can focus my efforts and energy on helping our customers rather than do something for which there is an automated process available. And then we have a new office chief. And so I want to review with them how they want to measure criteria and the associated weights for how we determine the priority impact of each project and the size and effort. So my parting thoughts, be report driven. What data do you need to report on? What does leadership need to know? What do you want leadership to know? What decisions will be made based on the data collected? You may not have the benefit of being ideologically aligned, but it does help. Find out what drives people on your team. What do they value? What do they need versus want? And what are the common elements you can agree on? When you hear a directive from leadership, talk about what your understanding is of what was said and clarify as needed. And sometimes provide binary options. Do you want choice A or do you want choice B? What do you like most about A? What do you like most about B? And there might be some wiggle room to create a blend of the two. And then finally, start small, start manageable, because you can always add on and build over time once you know what you really need. Okay, Charisse, do we have questions?
We do. Thank you for that presentation. The first question is, what is the difference between attainable and realistic?
I would say attainable is possible within the time frame that you have, with the resources that you have, and that realistic, it's a goal that makes sense. One of the other R's that is sometimes used is relevant. Is it relevant to the work that you're doing? You wouldn't want to focus on a goal that's outside the scope of your work or outside the scope of your project.
Great. Then another question is, have you ever considered using MS Forms, Microsoft Forms, with Power Automate to populate your Excel spreadsheet instead of using SharePoint lists? And if so, what were the factors that you considered in your decision?
We have not. I don't believe that those were available when we first started. New resources are coming available to us all the time. So that is definitely something that I'm going to add to our list to discuss what our availability is within ALTSA and talk with our team about what their needs are.
Great. And then another question, could you speak more about Power BI in the next steps?
Sure. So Power BI allows a lot of the data analysis to be fully automated. So it would take away the time that I would spend creating pivot tables, because Power BI really automates all of that. So you put everything into a Power BI spreadsheet, and then you can click on the chart types that you want, and all the work is done for you. And my ideal vision is to have it be fully automated so that don't even have to put the data, I don't have to manually put the data into the Power BI spreadsheet, but that it would just pull everything from our SharePoint list behind the scenes.
Great. Could you talk a little more about how you decided on what is a project? You talked about the capital P projects and the lowercase p projects. What were like the criteria? How did you decide? Was it like a committee, or did one person?
So there were 4 or 5 of us at the time that were talking about this. And I don't know if we ever fully came to a realization or a shared understanding before we had a transition of the lead. And then we sort of regrouped after that person left, and we'll figure it out. Well, okay, so now what? And we spent more time talking about what should be tracked and what shouldn't be tracked, and how do we want to do it, and And then we were getting closer. So for a while, there were some requests that we got that weren't being put into the system. But then it also was like, but leadership and our office chief wants to know what we're doing. And so it was a little bit of a mess. It was, it was a little bit of a sticky wicket, sticky mess. But we just sort of persevered, and then that lead took a job elsewhere within the organization. And so I was put into that role. So we were short-staffed for a while. And so those of us who were left, we just decided we're going to put everything in the system and adapt the system to be able to track everything, all the requests, and then along the way, figure out how to fine-tune our data categories and request categories.
Great.
And that's where, we're being ideologically aligned, it really makes a big difference. And also speaks to just how hard it is to create something from ground zero.
Absolutely. Another question is, how did you incorporate the customer feedback into your building of the project and finalizing?
Lots of questions, like, what is it that you need to see? Would show examples. Does this work for you? What about this works? What about this doesn't work? One of the questions that I like to ask my customers when I'm working with them on a project is, what are you not getting from me that you expected to see? And so I ask that question a lot. And a lot of times it's like, well, I think you're giving me everything. So sometimes you can go one of two ways. You can provide 2 or 3 options at a time, or depending on your customer, you can just overwhelm them with options. And so I think, figuring out the decision-making style of your customer is really important, so you know how to present information as well.
Absolutely, I like that. We have one more question, and then we have some folks who want to hear more about the broadband NASA rocket. So the last question that we have then is, if you could train all ALTSA staff on 2 basic data gathering and analysis tools, what would they be?
Ooh. I would say, and again, so I'm thinking about what's easily accessible to everyone. Recognizing that pivot tables are not as scary or as scary as they seem. A couple of years ago, I was working with someone, and she's like, "Can you help me with you talk about pivot tables, and I see some of the stuff that you do, but can you walk me through how to do it with my data?" And so she had a report, and at the time, this was before we had some of the data mart features that we have, where things are automated and already in a pivot table style format. And so I walked her through it, and she's like, "That's it?" And I'm like, "That's it." And so it sounds confusing, but I think to just take the step, if you're an Indiana Jones fan, the scene where he's has to take that leap of faith and step out into this pit, and he ends up landing on the bridge. Take that step, take that leap. Also know where your data comes from, know what the root of your data is. Because I think that will then help others understand how to help you with the data problems that you have.
Yeah, it comes back to being curious and asking those why, where.
Right.
Yeah. Great. So would you be willing to tell us more about the NASA rocket story?
Yes. So my dad worked as a control mechanical engineer. And in the 80s, mechanical robotic arms were very popular. It's one of those devices where you would use a joystick or some type of handheld control to move an arm in another room or separated from you by some space to mimic activity done by the human hand and human arm. Well, my dad's company had the opportunity to bid for NASA and was one of 2 finalists who were invited out to DC to demonstrate their device. And so he was spending a good chunk of the summer out there just tinkering and making sure everything was working and showing NASA decision makers everything that their device could do. So we went out to DC for a week to visit him and got to take a tour of NASA's HQ space in the DC metro area. And in one giant room, or at least it seemed giant to me as a young child, there was an arm that NASA had bought and they were doing the computer programming for. And as kids, we were invited to play with the arm. I have to say this wasn't my dad's company's robot, nor had they done any of the software programming. And it also wasn't their competitors. So, we're probably playing with this $1 million piece of equipment. So I climb up on the platform steps and, well, I'm around 10 or 11. I turn the knob as far as I could, because why not? What kid wouldn't? And let's just say that I kept turning past the point of stop per the programming, but not the knob. And let's just say that the knob won and the arm lost. So I'd completely forgotten breaking it, and I still don't recall the break, but I do remember playing with it until my dad and I were talking about a year or so ago about my work with Lean in the social service environment versus an engineering and manufacturing one. And in particular about airproofing, because I told him I was trying to airproof some of our response options in our SharePoint system. And he reminded me of my misspent youth. And he told me I had a lot of experience with airproofing. And I asked, well, what do you mean? And he replied, the time you broke the NASA robot. And I was like, I broke the NASA robot? I still have no memory of breaking the robotic arm, but I do trust my dad. If it happened, if he says it happened, it happened. But I think it's a great example of the importance of, one, bringing everyone together who touches the process or a product together from the beginning to ensure that everyone understands the customer needs. Because apparently the arm motion, I didn't just break it this way, but they also had a programming problem with the up-down motion of the arm. So I like to say that I saved, I helped future astronauts from having a real problem in space. It could have been the next, Apollo. So in addition to ensuring everyone understands the customer needs, just the need to think like a kid, to think without boundaries or constraints and focus on the possibility. And I think that's really the heart of Lean, is like what's possible, not what's in this box, but what are the final frontiers?
That's
so
awesome.
that's my NASA robot story.
That is a great story, and one I'm sure the grandkids at some point will love to hear. So thank you so much. We really appreciate your providing this information and having such a great session. I'm certain that folks got a lot out of it based on the comments and things that we saw.
Good.
Thank you all for being here today. And there's one more day of the conference left. So visit our website to revisit sessions. Maybe you want to rewatch or download information, materials, sign up for additional sessions, those sorts of things. So in a moment, the survey will pop up. Please take the time to do that. It's a quick couple question survey, and it really provides us some great feedback. Thank you for attending today's session, and have a great day.